Again, thank you very much for inviting me. So consider this presentation as a think piece, which suggests some key areas for further exploration. So this paper came out as a reflection from my current engagement in developing collaborative digital mapping with children. So I incorporated philosophy for children, or P4C, with a phenomenological approach in making pandemic adjusted play spaces designed by children, which needed dialogue, of course. In fact, I and other PhDs whose research were affected by this pandemic adjusted our research methods to be a digital placemaking using Minecraft style mapping with kids. So I resonated a lot with the previous presentations as well. But for today, my focus is in the classroom. So diversity in the classroom has emerged as a key dimension in pedagogical affairs in education. However, the persistent challenge is how to adapt a strategy that acknowledges the diversity of children towards a peaceful and productive dialogue. So contemporary classroom settings remain challenged in terms of being ready to accommodate students of many cultural backgrounds with a diversity of traditions, values, and beliefs. So as Dr. Paul Weller has pointed out in his workshop months ago, that dialogue disagreements will only be reinforced when the other party is not acknowledged to have the same legitimate way of arguing about a certain issue. When applied to a classroom setting, so that's what I did in my paper. I applied this kind of conflict resolution and issues in the classroom setting. And so conflicts here can root from culturally shaped competing beliefs, values, and interests that are not acknowledged. So although there have been efforts to cater for a diverse classroom setting, forming group cohesion and dialogue still remains a challenge in a diverse classroom. So for instance, previous studies have pointed out, and in my own experience as well, students from lower income families, immigrants, or minority groups are less confident in critical dialogue and thoughtful discussions in comparison to those who are with privileged status. So this is ironic because what was initially intended to be a platform for dialogue to engage in critical discussions can be transformed into a space that expects only certain forms of dialogue. And so here is where philosophy for children, or P4C, can be useful as a tool. So P4C, or yeah, philosophy for children, as founded by Matthew Lipman, aims to train primary and secondary school children to be critical and creative in the classroom and less commonly in extracurricular contexts. So rather than the conventional introduction of philosophical canonical concepts, P4C educators facilitate semi-structured dialogues or collaborative inquiries that foster familiarization to philosophical discussions. So as you can see here, they ask questions such as, is life a journey? Or these open-ended questions such as, could religion exist that had no believers? So P4C offers this physical and metaphorical avenue to listen, speak, and take note, I put emphasis to listen, and or remain observant, thereby enabling children to see for themselves the consequences of their thinking and also of the thinking of others, howsoever simple or complex they are. So P4C is interested in training young citizens to exercise their faculties of reason, as evident in many programs, initiatives, with support to the development of philosophy in schools. So P4C is important for dialogue because it is collaborative and encourages listening and acknowledging others, because there's really no answer to these questions. These are just open-ended questions for kids, and so it uses reflective approach that departs from the typical arrangement in the hierarchical school setting, where a dialogic culture of the classroom positions are expected to be maintained. The strategies here are, to use diverse ways to be critical for students and to express their perspectives and to listen to others through creative means. And this may provide new normative ways to have a productive dialogue in class. So this is also in recognition that children are deliberators themselves. And as you can see here, children are given time to think and to question the questions being asked to them and to think about the concepts involved in these questions. So this design is hinged on the challenge for philosophy scholars to uncover and, the structures and agencies that offer a variety of directions for philosophy for children. So through children's engagements in dialogue in the classroom, sharing perspectives through guided ways to recognize their differences, to understand their differences, can improve the communicative culture in the class as they are able to reconsider their thoughts, the thoughts of others, listen to others, and to assess their own thinking. So here, so yet while collaboration is given emphasis for in P4C, collaboration alone might not be sufficient to make children understand that some identities may be less familiar or less accepted for the majority in a given classroom. So here, using a phenomenological approach can be helpful to propel critical reflection so that participants, the children, of a dialogic process can explore and make sense of the philosophy for children experience or their P4C experience. So maybe they can, ask the question, so what's a monster for you? Why is a monster ugly? What is ugly for you? So they're opening all these questions. So this approach maintains that human beings are not passive perceivers of an objective reality, but rather come to interpret and understand their world by formulating their biographical stories into a form that makes sense to them. And now children are being trained to actually think that others also have their own experience. They have their own narratives and biographical stories. So this phenomenological approach has an overlap with the narrative accounts of lived experiences that is keeping students' critical narratives solid as told from their perspectives and their voice as well. So here you can see that students ask questions as well in different forms. So here, students' personal understanding on the subject matter are taken into consideration in order to create a plurality of ideas to brood over in class. And they do not only see their questions, they also see the questions of others and probably wonder how other people think, how other kids think. So the classroom dialogue here becomes a process jointly achieved by each student in order to acknowledge the existence of different ideas, not only ideas, but different ways of expressing them. So combining P4C with this phenomenological approach may serve as a vehicle for students to share their critical position while respecting others and fostering others to understand their views better, and then setting up this detached, carefully constructed logical argument in order for them to win. So they're not trained to have a dialogue or to debate to win, but to be open for the others and their others thinking. So children can even show their confusion, and it's not discouraged. So this is to thwart some classroom norms that have very fixed goals that may be driven by an impetus towards crossing out a checklist rather than serving as an intervention to resolve misunderstandings. And finally, after exchanges of ideas, the dialogue and the reflection comes processing and documentation through writing or any other outputs. So this can give space for other potentially pertinent critical thoughts to emerge. And documentation also serves as a factor for extra caution among those who engage in dialogue, especially in keeping an eye for insensitivities in the dialogue and to ensure that opposing sides and narratives are fairly represented in the process of dialogue. It transforms not only the experience, but also the thinking process into an external communicable medium. So their output solidifies the dialogue that they've made. So that's their evidence. And eventually, they create their own questions. So this can lead to further questions that they may be afraid to ask, or they might ask themselves, but they are not able to have, someone to talk to. So the questions get deeper and deeper. And so However, there are still challenges, and I would like to offer some implications and key areas for future studies, especially now that, again, we are transforming into some digital classrooms. So first, future studies are encouraged to establish long panel research that observes changes in how students engage in dialogue for at least 5 to 10 years after they have left school, after they have left philosophy for children. Such studies can also examine how diverse classroom contexts are related to one's dialogue engagements later in life, such as in higher education or even in the workplace. And second, intercultural and interethnic classrooms can benefit from the recognition of diversity in two specific research fields. So first, more research is needed on identifying specific situations in which conflicts arise in heterogeneous classroom. And this is also important, for example, in the Philippines, where it is very linguistically diverse. So, and also in rural areas as well in the Philippines, where people came from different islands. So this information will enable educators to anticipate specific conditions to deal with and to tweak their P4C questions to make it more inclusive as well. So second, dialogue strategies that support the success of students in a variety of culture, ethnic, or economic contexts are also needed. So heterogeneity in P4C classrooms also serves as an opportunity to observe whether intergroup interaction can actually contribute to improve dialogue exchange between in and out groups in a classroom. And finally, and we are all affected by this, the coronavirus pandemic has propelled the use of digital classrooms, which can be both beneficial and challenging in terms of dialogue and conflict resolution. So this is challenging because managing an intercultural digital classroom with kids call for informed and adaptive pedagogical strategies without nonverbal cues that can normally be found in offline classrooms. Thus, further research is encouraged to pay attention to investigating effective online P4C designs towards dialogue among children from diverse backgrounds. For instance, it is critical for digital textbook publishers of philosophy for children and learning technology developers in general to allow for diversity and representative reading materials. And by the way, students of diverse backgrounds themselves can be consulted through a process of dialogue or through, for example, a participatory action research so that their perspectives are taken into discussion. So, and finally, to conclude, this think piece is just to set the scene for questions to generate further investigations by locating classroom concerns in the field of dialogue studies, and it aims to spark reflection and spur dialogues among scholars of philosophy of education about the ways in which norms of dialogue should be judged in different contexts. These discussions go on to show that the continued relevance of the diversity in dialogue and the role of schools in it. And so as schools welcome new generations of students in a transitioning period, my hope is that dialogue continues to flourish with more engaged participants through the philosophy for children. So I think that's it.